Senior living operators face a complex set of challenges. How do you stay ahead of the pack? Listen in to From Leads to Leases, a CCR Growth podcast for expert solutions that transform problems into opportunities. And maybe someday soon you'll partner with us to generate $1.5 million and up in additional revenue per community in just 12 months. Welcome back to From Leads to Leases, the podcast where we dig deep into the strategies, insights, and stories that drive success in the senior living marketing and sales. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth, here to guide you through the evolving landscape of connecting communities with the families and residents they serve. In today's episode, we're diving into the nitty-gritty of paid search, specifically Google Ads and Bing Ads. This episode is part one of a two-part series where we explore the technical aspects of leveraging these powerful tools to boost your senior living community's visibility and drive quality leads. And joining me today is Jen Davis, our in-house Google Ads and Bing specialist at CCR Growth. With over 25 years of experience in search marketing and a deep understanding of the senior living market, Jen crafts unique strategies that generate outstanding results. From managing expansive groups of properties to individual sites, she knows how to tailor advertising campaigns that speak directly to the unique needs of each community. So today, Jen and I are going to discuss some key topics, including the importance of understanding the technical aspects of managing a paid search campaign and why looking at the full cycle from leads to move-ins is crucial for success. So whether you're a senior living marketing director looking to refine your PPC strategy or a sales professional eager to understand how search marketing can impact your lead generation, you're in the right place. So let's dive in. Welcome, Jen, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jerry.
Yeah, this is one of many conversations that Jen and I have had about PPC among other marketing topics. So I'm really excited to get into this. And just to discuss the technical side is going to be really interesting because I think this is a part that a lot of sales teams and even marketing teams within the senior living industry don't necessarily get the inside track on. So I think it's going to be really interesting for us to chat about this. So I guess to kick things off, can you share with us your journey into the senior living field and what drew you to this industry in particular?
Yeah, a couple things. First, I've been running Google and Bing ads for about 20 years. It's been basically my whole career. And other than maybe a year of that, it's been agency side. So I've seen a lot of different products, services, even outside of senior living. But one of the last agencies that I worked at before working with you, Jerry, is they were marketing to seniors, health insurance, and funeral homes, which is not super exciting, right? The necessary evil of health insurance and then funeral homes. But I will say, like, the funeral homes were being progressive. It was about a celebration of life. And I really started to learn how marketing to seniors is different, partly because they think differently than millennials or Gen Zs and things like that. In some ways, they've lived their life and, they know what they want at this point. So that kind of interested me. And then obviously you and I met about 3 years ago. Actually, I was just thinking about this. It's been 3 years that we met and started working with you specifically on senior living. And, part of it when I broke off from the other agency, good agency, but and joined you is I was looking for a little bit more of a purpose. Like I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was I wasn't just doing paid search for any company, any service, any product. I really kind of wanted to make a difference. And I think in a lot of these times, sometimes it's a necessary as senior living, like assisted living, and some of it isn't, but that's the lifestyle that people want in an independent living community. And I have both my mother-in-law and my mother are widowed, 76 and 81. And this is something that my husband and I are going to have to deal with probably sooner than later. So it's kind of nice that I have all this information. I know what to look for. And, ultimately, I think when we have to make that decision, I want to find the right place. And, here right now in paid search, that's what I'm doing is hopefully finding the right place for someone like me who's finding it for their parent or ultimately the senior.
I think we're in the same exact position when it comes to that, having the inside track and understanding how people search and what they're searching for, but then also understanding how complex this whole journey is when it comes to someone looking for the right place for their mom or dad or their loved one, So it is interesting that we're both facing this. My parents are in their mid 70s as well, and like they're not even considering senior living at this point in time, but I know that at some point that's going to be a conversation that we need to have. So it's interesting what you said too about funeral homes. I actually didn't know that about your previous experience, but it's interesting how they too were kind of repositioning themselves as end of life kind of celebration rather than it being such a dark time, right? It's more of a celebration of life. So I think that senior living is very similar in that sense, where there's this focus from it being a health centric industry to now a lifestyle centric industry. And I think like probably a lot of like the terminology that's being used is kind of shifting as well around that. So I know we're not really getting into searches and contextual nature of like how people are searching in this episode. We're going to do that in the next one, but I am curious as to how that shift is happening in the senior living industry too.
Yeah, it's happening in a lot of industries
Hmm.
because to your point, we used to focus on the negative and now we're
Yeah.
focusing on the positive. It's a lifestyle in independent living. Even in assisted living, it's still lifestyle. It's apartments. It's not necessarily like a hospital ward. Same thing with funeral homes. It's rather than, simply cry, let's remember the good times. They're now allowing audio video, for instance, so you can do a slideshow. So as technology changes, so does everything else with it. And what's nice about this is we are focusing on a positive rather than the negative of somebody being sick or unable or having decreased mobility to get around, a two-story house or something like that. They're really talking about, but you have, you can make friends, you've got a pool, you've got a library, everything is right here. Your whole life is kind of, in one area, and you can really probably do more than you could at home, for instance.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest draw, and I think a lot of communities now are trying to. I don't want to say they're spinning it differently, but they're trying to remove that stigma of like nursing home, which is still like one of the most heavily searched terms. And I think there's a lot of misinformation even for families out there, like who are looking for loved ones that they're going to have to make some sacrifices, but it's actually like it's not meant to be sacrifices. It's actually meant to enhance and bring all of the things that they love into one space, so that they don't have to worry about going to the grocery store anymore, going, doing all these extra chores and tasks or navigating maybe a home that's unsafe anymore because there's 3 flights of stairs or there's other obstacle fall hazards and other safety hazards and things like that. So I think communities overall are taking that negativity and turning it more into like here's where you're going to be able to truly thrive because you can focus on what matters most instead of worrying about all these other things. So I think for today's episode, we really want to focus on the technical aspects of paid search and what that entails. And so kind of the first piece of that, I think, when it comes to setting up a campaign or when it comes to a sales team or a marketing team thinking about starting a campaign, we think about cost management because the first thing we think of as ads is how much is it going to cost me, not only just to run the campaign, but how much is it going to cost per lead? And then how much is it going to cost per move-in? So what are some key considerations when allocating budget for paid search campaigns in this industry?
So I think that one of the biggest things is considering where the location of the facility is, or if there's
Hmm.
multiple locations, because a facility in a rural town in Illinois is going to be a lot cheaper than, for instance, even rural California or Florida, more of the retirement areas. So we have to take that into consideration. So if we're looking at two properties, one in Illinois and one in California, most likely we've got to put more budget to California simply because the average cost per click there is going to be higher. Now, it's probably going to be higher by $1 or $2. Again, some of it just depends on the location, but we
Yeah.
typically see in the more populous areas or the more, I would say, not retirement areas, potentially a cost per click of $4 to $6. And that can go up to about $6 or $8 when we go into more populous and more favorable, more retirement, Arizona, Florida, California. So that's the first thing to take a look at is where is it located? And, the great thing is Google gives you a lot of tools that you can, do some keyword research and then apply a location to that to see what the overall cost is. The other thing that we have to consider though is the targeting as far as the geolocation. Some of this might depend on the property itself. So maybe it's a property that basically, if you look at the residents that you've had currently and you've had in the past, if they're all coming from a 10-mile radius, 10-mile radius might be it. Maybe you go 11 or 12 to test and then go from there, for instance. But if you also, look at your residents and you've got a good number that are out in the 50-mile radius, then, going for that larger is probably important. So some of it just depends on the actual residence and location. The other thing to consider, though, too, is who typically is making the decision. And that might be led by who the residents are, for instance, or have been in the past. Have they made the decision, or has a child helped, or another caregiver helped to make the decision as well? Because children do not always live in the same city and or state as the senior. So those are other considerations that we have to think about when we're talking about budget and allocations, is who really is the target audience, or who is the majority of the target audience, because we're always going to have both the caregiver and the senior. But where have you come from in the past? And then also, but that's not to say that you shouldn't test, right? Because just because they're all within 10 miles doesn't mean that that's how it always has to be. You might go out to 15, test that. It might work for you. It might not. You pull back or you go further depending on how that goes. So the nice thing is Google can give you some guidance. Typically we see in senior living cost per leads. Some can get like $50 or $60. Again, certain locations, and again, more populous probably. But they go upwards of about $200 cost per lead, which may sound like a lot, but considering that these seniors are paying $2,000, $3,000, maybe even more, $4,000 or $5,000 a month, cost per lead is not actually at $200. Is pretty much, you're making up your money potentially the first month or the second month that they're there.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that too. If the cost per click is typically between like $4 to $6, then how many clicks on average would it take to generate a lead? If that's a statistic that's pretty consistent across the board, or does that vary by location as well?
It can vary by location, but we typically see, and because we run, of course, a little bit of brand and non-brand, so it's a little bit different between the two, but typically click-through rates, I like to see at about probably 10 to 15% for non-brand and 15 and above for brand, for instance. Some of them, it just depends on the brand awareness that's going on, particularly when we're outside of their core region, if we're trying to get the children, for instance. But yeah, we want to make sure of those non-brand, we're really going after those keywords that show intent for either a caregiver or the senior, and therefore have the high click-through rates, which ultimately then we're looking at 10 or 15% conversion rates as well.
Some of the community directors I talked to as well, they said that somewhere around 90% or higher of the move-ins that they get come from within that 10 to 15 mile radius of the community. So, I mean, how does that play in? Because if I look at myself as an example, like my parents are in New Jersey, I'm in California. If I'm searching, my parents don't want to move to California, so they're only looking at communities that are close in proximity to where they already live. So if there's quite a few adult children of, looking for communities for their parents or for a loved one, I mean, how does that factor in to the overall results?
Yeah, a couple things that we do from a technical standpoint is, to your point, if you were going to research for your parents, you're most likely going to research senior living in and the name of the city, or even maybe the name of the county. You may do state depending, but probably even if you do, you probably would hone it down a little bit. So, a community that's near them, that way they can go and visit, for instance. And then if you were able to get them, to sign up for that, then, it's not far from home. You're probably going to have to do, a couple move-in type things. So it's a little bit about convenience. So the nice thing is when we do targeting, we do 10 miles around. So that's going to capture anybody searching just for senior living or assisted living, for instance, that's in that 10-mile radius. But for those who are outside the state or even outside of that city or that 10-mile radius, they're probably going to attach the city. And Google allows us to show the ads to yourself in California if you are searching with the intent for a location in New Jersey, particularly that city or that county, for instance. Right. So that's the nice thing. And we also include things like senior living in and the city name, so that we can catch it just in case something is off with the geo-targeting, for instance, or it's not recognizing something, we can still certainly get those people. We also do and what we call an outside radius, which we typically target the whole state. That can depend on if there's multiple properties in the state, we may split up the state a little bit. But that way too, one, if somebody's searching for, senior living in New Jersey, we're capturing them no matter where they are. But also I think about it, I think about even, I'm in the Chicagoland area. My mom is 12 miles away. I may still want to search just senior living to kind of find a space between the two of us. That might be ideal. My sister is another 12 miles away from me. So, we've got 24 miles between my mom and my sister. So I don't want to limit myself to her city, my city, or my sister's city. So I might just type in senior living.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm in the state of Illinois and we're targeting that, then I can see multiple properties anywhere from where she is all the way down to where my sister is.
Yeah. And because of the vast expanse of the area that you're in, I'm sure there's way more options available for you than, say, if you lived in the middle of nowhere where there's like, two communities within a 30, 40 mile radius or something like that. So, yeah. So I think we already answered the question about sharing some strategies for ensuring that your ad spend is being used efficiently. I mean, is there anything else that we can kind of talk about in that, or do you think we've covered it?
One of the things that I would also recommend is we do a breakout of like the core keywords. The senior living, assisted living, even nursing home. And I know that that's a little bit of a taboo keyword, but when I was a kid, it was the old folks home. Now, I learned nursing home, which is a little bit better. And now people are starting to learn assisted living and independent living. But what we do is there are about 5 or 6 keywords, depending on what the community offers as far as, assisted versus independent, that we keep in one campaign so that we can feed that budget to those consistently converting keywords. And then we have another campaign. We have one for brand, we'll do competitors, and then we have another non-brand that is all of the kind of ancillary keywords that people might be looking for. So it might be something like memory care for dementia, a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
But we don't get a lot of impressions, a lot of clicks, or a lot of conversions. When they happen, they're great conversions, but I want to give enough budget to the ones that are, converting almost on a daily basis. And you do that at the campaign level. So we do a breakout of high volume, high converting versus low volume, low converting.
Just a side question. I mean, do you still see people doing searches for terms like nursing home that are actually looking for independent living? Does that happen, or is that like way off the mark?
No, I still see it. Probably not as much as maybe even 3 years ago. I think people are starting, part of it is because we don't really use nursing home in the ad copy. We're using independent living and assisted living. We're getting them used to that language.
Yeah.
Especially somebody that's just starting this journey. They don't even know what's out there, for instance, or what the difference is in some care. And then you throw in memory care and respite care and things like that. It gets confusing, but we try to be consistent in our wording. But it still is amazing to me that people just assume nursing home can mean independent or assisted living. So yes, we get for the independent retirement communities, we have people searching for nursing home because that's all that they know.
I would assume too that anyone searching nursing home would probably be like the adult children or the loved one, not the actual prospective resident themselves. Because I don't think anybody would want to label, the place that they were going to be calling home a nursing home. That would seem a little off the mark.
Yes, I agree. And although it's still better than when my grandparents were at that age, it was the old folks' home.
Yeah.
So, I think we got a little better in nursing. It denotes my grandmother was a nurse, so it denotes care to me in some way versus old folks' home is just,
It's a place to
place
send
right.
old. Yeah. Yeah. You get to
like
that
a
certain
bad
age.
retirement.
Yeah. We're just going to throw you in that building and forget about you. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're progressing.
Yeah. Little by little, generation by generation. So talking about like return on investment and kind of optimizing that for senior living providers, I mean, how can they best track and measure the ROI of their paid search campaigns?
First level, of course, is leads. Making sure that we're tracking things like any type of form fill, a brochure download, floor plan downloads, even the contact us page. You'd be amazed at how many people end up there versus what they really want of like schedule a tour. Phone calls, both in the ads themselves, so those mobile click to calls, but also calls from the website. So important to, just capture all of that. Because you start to learn too, is the requested brochure a better potential lead because they tend to convert and move in more versus the ones that, use the contact us page. So you can learn a lot from that. So that's your first thing. You got to track all the leads. The second part of it is of course feedback on those leads. I would say first of we're always going to get, this happens in every account, a little bit of that junk where they don't know what they're doing, they're just filling out a form kind of idea. Maybe it could be even that they mistyped a phone number or something, so you can't get a hold of them. So we kind of put those in the junk lead pile. And then there's the ones that maybe they're just starting off their journey, they're not ready to make a decision, whether it's the child or the senior, for instance. And then we have the ones that are ready to move in, they want to do a tour, they want to get pricing and things like that. And then you've got other ones, maybe they can't afford it, those types of things. So giving that feedback to the person who is managing the account is so important, because there are things that we can do. The problem is on my end, when I look in Google Ads platform, I just see a number. We got 10 leads today, but it doesn't tell me that 9 of those leads can't afford the service, for instance.
Yeah.
So getting that feedback so that we can hone in on a couple things is super important. But then the next level, of course, is move-ins. Now there's processes, or there's, other milestones in there. They schedule a tour, or they talk to the director or something like that. So there's other milestones that we can measure in there, but ultimately it is the move-in. And so how much did you spend to get that lead, and what is, the lifetime value of that potential lead that's now turned into an actual client that is money in the bank at the end of the day, and a move-in, and keeping your property at a higher percentage of occupancy, which I also think is important. So it's two-step really. Make sure your lead quality is good, and then how many of those leads, assuming that they're good quality, once you get to that point, are actually moving in. And like I said, communities can range from like a $50-$60 cost per lead all the way up to $200. If you're within that range and your leads are overall good quality, the move-ins are going to happen. And then you just need to do the math back to how much you're spending in total, how many leads, what's that conversion rate, lead to tour to move-in, for instance, whatever those milestones are. And that'll help you also figure out your budget going forward. So if you need 10 more leads per year, figure out how many leads you had, how many moved to tour, how many ultimately moved in, and that tells you, what you need to go back as far as, I need 100 more leads to get 10 move-ins. So what's that cost per lead then?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting too. Like when I go back and I look at the data across our portfolio and I look at the different channels, like paid search versus SEO versus say like your Google business listing, and then maybe like referral agencies, the conversion percentage is reasonably close on all the different steps until you get to the final step, which is lead to move in. That percentage is dramatically different for each channel. But like the number of leads who say book a tour and then the number of leads who show up for the tour, those are almost the same for almost every single channel. Some people will say, well, ads don't have the same quality as SEO leads or as other channels, but in our experience, I mean, I feel like they're right in line with every other channel, and I don't see any dip in lead quality whatsoever. And the number of leads that are booking tours are just as many percentage wise as any other platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is the nice thing, SEO takes a while. So paid search can really be the place where if you need a good number of leads, and that's where you can make a lot of changes. Like if you need less leads, you can cut down the budget. If you need more leads, you can increase the budget. And that's where you can really kind of make those shifts that you can't necessarily do in SEO, for instance, or even Google My Business, because it's all about people finding you and stuff like that. But you may not be able to make too many moves there in order to do that. But in some cases, in most companies, I would say never get to the spend level that, ultimately would stop, new leads coming in. Ultimately, it's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on where the property is, in order to hit that spend ceiling.
Yeah, especially in this industry, it's so competitive. And yeah, I totally agree. I think anytime we acquire a new senior living client, the first thing we do is we look at running ad campaigns, just because we want to get a quick win for our clients. And the easiest way to do that is to run a ad campaign, because we understand how the system works. We understand that the majority of people are searching online first to shop and find communities that are, a good fit for them, and then they reach out. And then as we're working on the lead campaigns, we're working on the SEO in the background. So maybe a month or two down the road, SEO kind of catches up with the leads. But in the meantime, we've been able to kind of fill their pipeline. So that seems to be the winning
Absolutely.
combo. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we know that when SEO kicks in and the Google My Business is optimized too, that only lifts all channels. So in that month that we were able to do SEO and lift Google My Business as far as filling out more information and stuff, that only ultimately leads to more search leads, but SEO leads and Google My Business leads.
Yeah. In terms of the campaign itself and what you're looking at inside of the ad platform, whether it's Google or Bing, I mean, what are the metrics that should be closely monitored to ensure that you're getting the most out of someone's ad spend?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the one thing that I always look at is, am I running out of budget during the day? In a particular day, maybe a week. We work with budgets usually on a monthly basis, so there's pacing involved and things like that. And some days we spend a full budget, other days we not. But if we're severely limited by budget, based on what the client can afford, that is something that we definitely bring up. So I'm making sure that if we have adequate budget, I mean, it's like I said, I feel like sometimes it's never adequate, but we can pace it well that we are consistently getting leads on a daily basis. So that's one thing, is how do I balance that between multiple campaigns? And again, we've got priorities. We know the non-brand, that is the 5 or 6 keywords: assisted living, nursing home, those types of things. We feed as much of that. And what I'm looking for, kind of in a day over day, week over week, month over month, and even year over year, is I want to make sure things like our click-through rate aren't going down. But that also plays into, obviously, impressions and clicks. But the first thing I look through is click-through rate. If our click-through rate is dropping into single digits, then I know I have an issue. Am I not getting enough impressions? Is there a new competitor in the space that's driving up these costs per clicks, for instance? So looking at the average CPC, Bing and Google do give you some insight. Auction insights is what they call it, in competitors. So that's kind of like almost on a daily basis. Are we continuing to pace where we have been as far as impressions, clicks, click-through rates? The other thing that I look at is obviously leads. And this can be tricky sometimes, because there are things that are going to produce a lead or a couple leads per day, and then there's times where it's going to go quiet. And some of it depends on things that are going on outside of even Google ads or Bing ads, for instance. That
We
could
talk
be
about that more than anything, I
yes,
think. What's going
I
on?
know.
Why is this happening? And we're like, oh,
Yes.
we forgot. It's a holiday weekend.
Exactly. Mothers, but the ironic thing is, in senior living, as we've also talked about, is we get that lull right before Thanksgiving. And then it seems like the day after or shortly after that, we get a big surge. Same with Christmas. We get a lull a week or two before, and then the day after. And part of that is children going back home or seeing their parents for the first time in maybe a couple months, and they see that decline all of a sudden, and they start to make those inquiries. So we see things like that. And, some of that is it's just a little bit of seasonality that we've identified over the years. But then you have weird things like it's spring break week, and for most of the country, and then all of a sudden it goes quiet. You're like, why is it quiet? It's like, oh yeah, kids are home from school. Nobody's worried about this right now. But you tend to see that lull in other, outside of senior living as
But
well.
you wouldn't think
Um,
about that in senior living because it's senior living. But then you're like, oh, yeah, wait, no, it's the adult children who are doing most of the searches. So, of course, they would be occupied with their own kids rather than worrying about their parents. So, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So that's why year over year analysis can do wonders.
yeah.
The toughest thing with that is your budget distinctly different this May versus last May, for instance? But I know Mother's Day weekend is pretty quiet on Saturdays and Sundays, but we get a lift the following week. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens this year. Sometimes you kind of have to pick it out because it's a different date, same with Thanksgiving, but you see it all the time. So pacing budget a little bit differently. Like we've got Memorial Day, the 27th this year.
Hmm.
So, normally when it's like a 30 or a 31st, I kind of front load the budget a little bit more. Here, we've still got a couple days afterwards. So, but I'm going to bring it down for the weekend. I will bring it back up like about Tuesday, let it finish out pretty good for the month, for instance. So you're kind of looking for those external things that have an impact. Sometimes you have to see the trend. It may not be the case in everyone, but I think in all the properties we manage, we see it almost every single time. The only opposite I've seen is actually more leads like Thanksgiving Day that I wasn't expecting, for instance, for a certain property. But, that's the biggest thing, is just understanding where your leads are coming from, knowing that every week is not going to be the same. we can get 10 leads one week and we can get 2 the next week and then back to 12 the next week. The problem is that this is people searching. So it's a need based. You can't basically, force people to search for these things if they don't need it. But that's why we want to look at things like monthly, quarterly, and yearly as well to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. And again, I use kind of the lead information in Google Ads and then the feedback and the move-in data ultimately from their CRM to make sure that we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and you can't freak out and make a whole bunch of changes just because you have a slow week all of a sudden, and start playing the guessing game. Oh, what's not working? All of a sudden, we need to change all these things. And I think, what I think the most important thing about everything you just said is that people need to hear and understand is that paid search is not like a set it and forget it model at all. Like you're continuously touching every campaign that we're managing. I think that's really important. And like, that's the part I think that would probably stress me out the most if I were to step into that space, is worrying about the daily budget and if we're hitting it or not hitting it, or if we're not hitting it, what does that mean? So the fact that you're able to kind of do that dance and make those adjustments says a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of audits and dashboards in order to see that. Because you're right. The other thing is you don't want to overcorrect. So if we underspent yesterday, if I think about a campaign that has a $50 a day budget and we only spent 10 yesterday, I don't up the daily budget to 90 for the next day. Like I might edge it to like a 60, catch up a little bit, for instance, but that just means that there wasn't a lot of search volume for that yesterday. It's probably in a couple days, I'm probably going to spend double the budget because Google will allow the budgets to do that. There's two things: no correction and overcorrection are the two worst things. I would lean towards overcorrection being the absolute worst.
How much of it is a manual process for you too, or are there automation tools that help along the way?
There is. Google has some automation to it itself, like you can set rules and things like that. For instance, I could set a rule and do utilize these sometimes where, especially on those really high converting, high volume campaigns where we're struggling a little bit, we're shutting off maybe earlier in the day, but I don't want to because we're getting leads in. So I can set up a rule that says basically if we already have 3 leads today and we're within 90% of the budget, up the budget, and I'll check it every hour and make that change, for instance. But in addition to that, utilizing a tool like Sky, some people may know it as Kenshu. That's what it was known years and years ago. And when they came on board, they actually were one of the first tools, I think, that had bidding algorithms. And so now Google has introduced their bidding algorithm. So before you had to go to a third party in order to get a bidding algorithm like max conversions or a target ROAS or something like that. Google's now built that into the system. So Sky had to get a little bit more creative in what they're offering since the bidding algorithm isn't in use as much. They still have it, but I find that Google's is better simply because they have the data and like thousands of signals on searchers that even Sky can't have. So what's great about that tool is it takes away hours of the grunt work. I have it do an audit every day. So I know if we have disapproved ads, billings down, keywords are disapproved, if the click-through rate has gone down, if leads have gone down, I get a report every 24 hours that tells me so I can react to things quickly. I can set up similar rules where if we have so many leads per day, we're getting low on budget or things like that, I can make those changes, or it alerts me and then I go in and make those changes, I should say. So there's still a human component to it. It will alert me to trends of negatives that I should be adding based on all the properties. So, sometimes people in senior living will search for like senior living apartments under $300, which is not our target audience. But the problem is if I'm just looking at one community, I may see only one of those searches among thousands, and I might not find that needle in a haystack. The system will, because it will also look at all the other properties and see if there's similar searches or something at least similar that is somebody searching for a price point to alert me that there's negatives that are needed as well.
Okay, that's cool. Very cool.
Yes. And then it helps me with budget pacing. It has its own, forecasting system based on historical data. So that helps a lot too. So I don't have to spend all this time doing calculations and checking every single campaign. I mean, in the one we have, I think 236 campaigns running, for instance, that would take me all day. And then I couldn't spend time on expansion and strategy, which is more important. I mean, the things day to day, making sure things are on, negatives are in place is so important. but ultimately it doesn't make things that much better. It's really expansion, creative solutions, strategy that is ultimately going to bring in more leads.
Yeah. I think these tools just give you the total, 360 view of what's going on at all times. Whereas if you were trying to manually do all these things, that I'm just envisioning like the wizard with his hand on like 50 different levers at the same time. There's only so many levers you can pull. So that just helps you out in that space.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's still that human touch. I get to make the decisions. It's just kind of feeding me some of the stuff so I don't have to spend 3 hours looking for it.
Yeah. Shifting more towards the copy of the ad itself, and specifically responsive ads. I hear a lot about responsive ads. Can you tell me more about the importance of them and how those are used to ensure that ads resonate with both older adults and their families?
Yeah, so and Google's kind of gone through a series of different ads.
Hmm.
We had the typical text ad, which I believe was just 2 headlines and 2 descriptions. I forgot, it's been a while. But then they had the expanded text ads, which were 3 headlines and 2 descriptions. Headlines are 30 characters and description are 90 characters. So not a lot to work with. So you basically, came up with 3 headlines, 2 descriptions. Most likely we created 2 ads per ad group with a little bit different messaging. We could A/B test it to see if something worked and then, change it out. But they got rid of those, I think in 2021, if I remember, and it changed over to the responsive ads. And what responsive ads do is we have 15 headline slots, still 30 characters, and then 4 description lines, also still 90 characters. The nice thing is 2 things. One, Google now gives us what they call an ad rank strength. So as you're filling in headlines, it will tell you, it rates it from poor, average, good, and excellent. A couple combinations go into what make it good, poor all the way to excellent.
Hmm.
A couple things is they want, almost have, I think technically 12 headlines filled out in order to, be above a poor. So we typically try to do 15. I mean, we can get pretty creative
15.
with
Wow.
senior living.
That's a lot of
Yeah,
headlines.
it is a lot of headlines. They want to see some of the keywords that you're bidding on in your headlines. It doesn't mean it has to be exact, but some combination in there. And then they also want to see call to actions. So give us a call, shop now, you can think of 100, schedule a tour, those types of things. And then for descriptions, again, they're going to want to see a couple, you mentioning kind of the keywords that you're bidding on. We want to fill out all 4 of them as well. But that's our area to kind of get a little bit more of the value props. The reason why, one, ad strength, we try to keep it good or excellent. The only time that we may struggle with that is if we're bidding on competitor terms, because we typically do not use the competitor terms in our ad copy because we don't want people to think that we're trying to represent them, for instance. So that is an area that could be poor or average, and that's okay. But when we're good or excellent, we usually expect and we'll see a higher click-through rate and a lower average CPC. Part of that is because Google will take, of the 15 headlines and 4 descriptions, they will show up to 3 headlines. It could be 2, but up to 3, and 2 description lines. It could just be 1, but they can also show up to 2. And they try to find the right combination for the searcher. For example, if somebody is searching for senior living and we have senior living in a headline, it most likely will show them the senior living headline. No guarantee, but that's basically the concept. The
Hmm.
same with description line for mentioning senior living. So for instance, some of our headlines will be like, find senior living for parents, or however many characters that is. So that if somebody is searching for their parents, for instance, and they've, some of it might be they've interacted with like a place for mom, for instance, which is usually an indication that the child is searching. Google picks up on this and will most likely show them an ad that mentions senior living for parents. That makes it a little bit more of a connection for them, and they're more likely to click and find out about your community. So keeping those we basically target both the senior and caregivers in our responsive headlines based on different headlines and a little bit difference in the description, and we rely on Google to show them the right one. But at the end of the day, even if it's not the right one, some of it is just, the value props that you're talking about as well that ultimately will help them to click. But chances are they're seeing the right ad for the right person.
So Thank you for all that information. I just got caught on one piece of that, which was the competitor ad space. So talk me through the legalities of that. So for example, if I were Nike and I was going head to head with Reebok, I could mention Reebok in my ad even though I was selling a Nike product. Is that allowed?
So there is a way for brands or companies to trademark their name. So Reebok can go in and tell Google, I don't want anybody running an ad with my name in it unless I've whitelisted them. Which means if Nike tries to use Reebok, they will get a notification that their ad will be limited due to the trademark use and them not being whitelisted under Reebok's account, for instance. The only exception is usually with resellers. So if we have a store that's selling Reebok shoes, for instance, most likely Google will allow them to use Reebok without being whitelisted because they're selling those items online, for instance. So at any time, any company can trademark their name, which also gets really annoying as a search marketer when somebody, trademarks the name Life and then you try to use Life in your ad and you get dinged. Google usually cleans it up, but still. So technically the ad will still serve. It just may not serve in all the instances that it has available because there's a trademark in it. So that's one thing that it ultimately is a business decision is what I would say. I've had success with not using and really what I would say exploiting the issue with the competitor that makes you better. An example would be if you are a food service delivery and you deliver fresh food versus frozen food, it's fresh, never frozen, where you're kind of undercutting your competitor, but you're not mentioning them specifically. That works better than, polishing your apple with their cloth kind of idea,
Yeah.
or confusing people by using their name. And sometimes people just don't read enough to know that you're not really, Reebok, that you're actually Nike.
I would think even if you don't use their name. So for example, Brookdale Senior Living, one of the largest senior living providers, they're running a competitor campaign. So anybody who types in Sunrise Senior Living will see a Brookdale ad. But even if they don't mention Sunrise by name in the ad, their ads can still show up for a Sunrise Senior Living search. So
Yes.
that's an interesting strategy, but also could be misleading to somebody because they might just see, senior living community in XYZ neighborhood and assume they're clicking on a Sunrise Senior Living, but they're actually clicking over into Brookdale. So I'm curious about the conversions on, competitor based ads versus, straight brand or just general searches.
Yeah, they're generally low.
Yeah.
I think it's really what I've seen, at least from lead quality, is it's still people in the research phase, but they saw a Brookdale commercial. So that made them start to think of, well, I need to look for this. And when they looked for it, they saw other options. But if it's really somebody that is, no, I really like Brookdale, I've heard enough about it, I've gotten referrals, I need to find that. Convincing them through ad copy or even a landing page doesn't work really well. They're already fixated on that. So you have a little bit of both. But I would say definitely if people know the name, they're most likely a little bit more fixated on, ultimately going with that company. But it does work on occasion, but it's not really high volume.
That makes sense. In the beginning of the episode, I kind of mentioned Google and Bing, and I wanted to shift gears and just talk about maybe the differences of those two platforms. So how do strategies differ when running campaigns on Google versus Bing for senior living communities? And are there specific advantages to using one platform over the other outside of, search volume? I guess that would be the biggest one that we see since Google's the giant.
Right. Yeah. Google is definitely the 800-pound gorilla.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely there's advantages in Bing too, is you just never know who's searching. And while Bing has a very low percentage of audience, they also, they have a partnership with like DuckDuckGo, for instance. So your ads can show on DuckDuckGo when people are searching there as well. So there's other advantages that you can't get through Google. For instance, Google ads do not go on DuckDuckGo. So there are some advantages, but it's just super low volume. So depending, again, a little bit on the property, but I would say for at least to start with, I usually go with 85 to 90% of my budgets on Google. and the rest of it, which is 10 or 15%, is on Bing. In addition, I don't do the geolocation as aggressive in Bing, and I don't do breakouts of campaigns. I really only go with the top converting keywords, and I target to the whole state. Because as we get into targeting and those breakouts, I'm crunching the budget down, to like $2 a day if I ran the same campaigns that I'm running in Google that I run in Bing. And there's just not enough volume, and it would be like one click per day. It's not worth it. So I do combine top keywords. And what I do look at is not only the top keywords that I know, the 5 or 6 that are, assisted living. You have to be bidding on assisted living if you're an assisted living facility. But all the other ones that are, high, that do convert in Google, I will move them over to Bing. And that's something I run a report every month to see what is converted in Google recently that I don't have in Bing and move it over. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to work in Bing. So sometimes we end up pausing those, but that's typically kind of how it goes. What converts gets moved over. The biggest thing, I like having both platforms. It's a little bit hard to manage in the sense that Bing, in my mind, is a little bit hard to manage versus Google because its matching system of keywords is much worse than Google. I mean, most cases, we're not running a lot of broad match keywords that can match to a lot of different things. That's where Google, I will say, does a little bit better than Bing. But if we were running a broad match keyword, which means it can match the synonyms, Bing has a tendency of seeing assisted living and independent living as synonymous, which it's not. So we get a little bit more honed in Bing, for instance, and we have to add a lot more negatives to it because it just matches to a lot of other junk, basically. It also has an audience network that you can't opt out of. In Google, it's called Google Search Partners, and you can opt out of it because it's not necessarily people searching for things. It could be park domains that are showing your ad and things like that. You can't necessarily get rid of that in Bing. There's ways to help mitigate it with budget and not adding, ironically, images to your campaign, which is a little bit annoying because we do that in Google, and I think we get a higher click-through rate with it. But that's how you negate the 20% that can go to the audience network because it's basically wasted spend, particularly when you're doing lead gen. But definitely, I would say it's not as costly to devote 10 or 15% of your budget. Some of it might just depend on the property where it's located. If you have success, you're going to have some success, but it's going to be incremental value to what you're doing in Google.
When talking about Bing and Google, I think Bing was a strategic choice that we had made back when we started kind of looking at how we could expand reach and generate more quality leads for our senior living clients. And one of the things about Bing that I thought was an interesting play is the fact that the majority of PCs that are purchased outside of like the business world are typically by older adults, and the default browser installed on PCs is the Microsoft Edge browser, and the default search engine in that browser is Bing. So unless they're typing in Google and going to Google directly, there's a higher percentage of older adults that are actually searching for doing their searches on Bing rather than Google. And that was one of the strategic moves why we chose to incorporate Bing into our campaigns. So that might be something for senior living providers to think about too. If they're only advertising on Google, they might be missing out, even though it's a small percentage. It's like 5 or 6% of the total search volume is going to Bing. It could produce some pretty decent results for them.
Yeah, and I think I've had better results on lead gen for senior living than I have in any other industry, as well as e-commerce. So I definitely think you're right. I think the other thing, and a little bit why Bing has potentially lost some of their share, though, since like pre-COVID, is companies would shut down, installing certain browsers or like Google Chrome, for instance, and default to the Edge, which also defaulted to Bing. So if people were in their office, they had to use Bing, and this would be like the caregiver searching as well. Now that's shifted a little bit since we're more virtual world at home. Some people are even using their own computer versus a work computer in some instances. So some of that has gone away, but definitely the seniors are still, it's just the default. So it's easier to go with the default.
Are there any other functionalities or features within these platforms that senior living marketers should be leveraging to maximize their campaign performance that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing, and we'll see if Bing catches up, but Google has different campaign types. While Bing has search and display and things like that, Google has been introducing more AI related campaign types, one of which is being Performance Max.
We
And I
love
know
it.
there's a lot of search, right? A lot of search marketers are like, I hate Performance Max. The reason why people hate it is, admittedly, it's a little bit of a black box. We do not have as much control over it as we would if we were running just a specific video campaign or a display campaign or even a search campaign. However, it is using technology that none of us have access to. It's Google's AI system. It's their signals of searchers, and it's trying to utilize the budget. And like I said, it can do Google Maps, it can do Gmail, display, video, and search. And it's trying to find the right place for the right lead. And we were a little skeptical too, but we tested. And that's the important thing, is testing those new things. Because we also tested demand generation, which is also another Google campaign, for instance, didn't really work for us. And that's okay. It just may not be a thing for senior living, or may not be for the properties that we tried. But Performance Max, what we looked for is not just direct conversions, because that's not always the telltale sign. Although we have gotten a lot of direct conversions on it. But we're also seeing a lift in our brand and non-brand search campaigns as well, which is nice. And I think it's also, it's a little bit of remarketing in there. So it's not something that we have completely switched over to, because there's still things that we want to control. We want to make sure that if somebody searches for assisted living within 10 miles of that property, we want to be there and search. Performance Max may or may not show us. So we are making sure that we're there because we know that works. But trying those new things, testing it is so important. So that's one of the other reasons why we rely on Google a little bit more, is because they generally evolve with their technology more and more. Bing is usually a step behind. An example, they actually launched Performance Max in January of this year, and it was very underwhelming. And I think they're doing another relaunch of it, maybe in third quarter, MLC. So far we haven't tested it.
Maybe.
We haven't tested it because we were really under impressed by it. And I don't feel like it had the AI power behind it that Google does. So we're waiting for the second iteration.
I think that'd probably be my biggest piece of advice that I can offer to senior living marketers, is to your point, when it comes to testing, don't be afraid to test, and don't be afraid to just try something out on like one community or two communities. Maybe if you have different living options within your portfolio, maybe test a few of those. Maybe if it's memory care, skilled nursing, and independent living, maybe a community or two, and see how those different types of campaigns play out on each of those types of communities, because we've seen success sometimes in independent living, but we don't see it in memory care, or vice versa. And you don't have to make a total portfolio, wide change. If you just test it on a few communities with just a little bit of a budget, you can really start to see, okay, this is working. This is lowering our cost per lead, or we're getting more leads, or these are converting more to move-ins than other types of campaigns. So then at that point, you can take those results and then you can replicate them across the board, but you don't have to make a massive change overnight. So I think, as we wrap up our conversation, Jen, what would be the best piece of advice you could offer to senior living providers when it comes to analyzing both their leads and their move-ins?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, maybe a little bit of a combination, is understanding how your people are searching. And again, you may not want to be known as a nursing home, but we still have people searching for nursing homes. So you have to make sure that you're there and in front of them. And then based on that, what does that lead quality look like? And then ultimately, if you have good lead quality, if you are not getting move-ins, it might be something outside of Google ads or Bing ads in that case. And looking at the community, looking at, I'll say the salesperson, or maybe the director, or whoever they meet with, and things like this. Like, having good Google ads set up doesn't mean you have move-ins. You have to have a good community, good people within your community that ultimately help that as well. So as a search marketer, I'm leading the horse to water, but you've got to get the horse to drink, basically. So if the lead, if it's lead quality is bad, then that's on me. If lead quality is good and you're not getting them in the door, even if they're scheduling a tour and actually showing up, then there's something also fundamentally wrong that, is more of an internal thing, potentially sales, staffing, whatever that is.
So this isn't like Field of Dreams where if you build it, they will come and everything just magically happens on its own.
I do my best, but it doesn't always work if there's a fundamental issue with the property or something like that. But if you've got good lead quality, ultimately those should turn into move-ins. That's really what you want to look at, and learn from that. Is it the 55-year-olds, or is, if you're independent living, are you really getting 55-year-olds? Which also scares me, because that means I could move into independent living in a couple of years, but wouldn't, unless something happens. Or are you getting 80-year-olds? And tell us that, because that can tell, your search marketer how to change up the ad copy. We're advertising 55 plus, but if most of your residents are 75 plus, then maybe we need to change that a little bit so that we're attracting those 75 plus, and they're not worried about being in a room with, people who are 20 years younger than them.
Think about all the wasted ad spend too. If you literally have, 20 years of people that you're marketing to that aren't necessarily a good fit, or are not going to want to be moving into a community if they don't identify with that age demographic. So I think that makes total sense. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the technical side of paid search, I hope you found the insights shared by Jen Davis as valuable as I did, from understanding the technical aspects of developing a paid search strategy to the importance of tracking the full cycle from leads to move-ins. We've covered a lot of ground. Jen, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Your knowledge and experience in Google and Bing are both impressive, and I'm sure our listeners are going to benefit greatly from the strategies and tips you provided. So I just want to say thank you for being a part of the show and for contributing to our audience here.
Glad to be here. I'm excited that we're going to do another one too.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, this is only part one, so you guys can buckle in and get ready, because it's about to get interesting. So, but if you do want to stay connected with Jen or learn more about how CCR Growth can help optimize your paid search campaigns, be sure to visit our website at ccrgrowth.com or follow us on our social media channels. And remember, the journey from leads to leases is all about strategy, execution, and continuous improvement. So thanks for tuning in to From Leads to Leases. Don't miss out on our next episode, where Jen and I will continue this series by exploring the consumer side of paid search and how prospective residents and their families search for senior living communities and what you can do to capture their attention. We'll also chat about optimizing for local search, which I know is a big factor. Like we talked about, most leads or move-ins are coming from within a 10, 15-mile radius of the community. So that's going to be a big factor for generating quality leads for most communities. So I'm Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth, thanking you for joining us on From Leads to Leases, where we're giving you all these great senior living industry insights for free and asking nothing in return other than for you to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. I'm truly grateful for your time and attention. Until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks for tuning in. Explore more at ccrgrowth.com. At CCR Growth, we've developed the Senior Growth Innovation Suite to unlock an additional $1.5 million and up in revenue per senior living community within a year. We specialize in generating quality leads, expediting sales, and reducing acquisition costs. Let's connect soon.